House of the Dragon follows the history of House Targaryen, particularly the war known as the Dance of the Dragons, which this show provides a bit of context for. It's part of George R.R. Martin's pre-existing Game of Thrones universe, and as part of that universe, there were plenty of points from the books where the series could have started. That's what Mr. Martin thinks anyway. Let's start by getting into some of the alternate openings George R.R. Martin believes the show could have had. The Civil War didn't just happen out of nowhere. There were a ton of things that led up to it, and that's exactly what House of the Dragon covers. The show itself featured many time jumps to bring audiences up to speed on the backstory surrounding the Ultimate Dance. The series as we saw it begins in 101 AC, after the Conquest, with a great council called to determine Westeros' succession. Viserys is chosen as king, and that's when the series starts to jump forth throughout the duration of his reign. In an interview, Martin revealed that the show could have actually started out very differently. He said that one of the writers wanted to start it off later, with Queen Aemma dying. This writer wanted to skip the Great Council and the tournament, and just begin with a scream indicating Aemma's death. So that was one of the possibilities. He added that still another writer wanted to begin even later, with Viserys dying. But that may have made the story a little complicated for viewers to understand because all the material would either have to be provided in the form of flashbacks or dialogue. More importantly, what about Martin himself? Where did he want to start? He expressed his own desire to have House of the Dragon start at an earlier important point in House Targaryen's history, 40 years earlier, with an episode he would have titled The Heir and the Spare. Here's how that would have gone down. Jaehaerys' two sons, Aemon and Balon, would have been alive, and we would have seen the friendship as well as the rivalry between the two sides of the prominent house. Then Aemon would have died an accidental death when he was shot by a Myrish crossbowman, leading to Jaehaerys having to decide who would ascend the throne as the new heir. He would have had to choose between Aemon's daughter or the second son with children of his own, and then the story could have carried on the way it did in the series as we saw it. Martin wanted to include all that stuff, but he said that they would have had to cover 40 more years, and maybe even more if they'd chosen that route. The only question we have, why didn't they go down this route? We doubt anyone would have had a problem with extra episodes to fill in for the content. Maybe extending the season to fit all that in may not have been such a bad idea. The large time jumps in the show inevitably mean that a lot of notable events had to be skipped. So why exactly couldn't they have just had more episodes? If they'd added just 3 more, they would have been able to start the season earlier in the timeline. Like we mentioned, Martin himself said that he very much liked the idea of starting the series a generation earlier, with Viserys and Rhaenyra's father. And if there's one thing that we're sure of, it's that you shouldn't question George R.R. Martin when it comes to storytelling. If they'd done what he wanted, then those 40 years or so he wanted to include could have easily fit into 3 episodes, and would have allowed viewers to understand the relationship between Aemon and Balon more thoroughly. If this version had been followed, Aemon's death could have ended the first episode, and the second would focus on the debate over who would succeed Jaehaerys as the next heir, Rhaenys or Balon. Jaehaerys would decide on Balon, but the succession crisis would begin again with Balon's untimely death. Finally, the third extra episode could cover the political drama centered around the Great Council of 101, featuring all the interesting divisions and corruption among the lords. After Viserys' succession to the throne, the series could skip to what we saw as the actual first episode of the show. Also, the extra episodes could have also accounted for the time jumps. Instead of all those time jumps that a lot of viewers weren't too impressed by, some extra time could have been dedicated to expanding some roles so certain characters' deaths could have been more impactful. And instead of the 3 extra episodes at the beginning, they could even have gone with 3 episodes between episodes 5 and 6, which would have addressed the problems between Rhaenyra and Laenor. That could have also delved into the former's relationship with Harwin Strong. We already know that everyone knows that Harwin fathered her children, even if they hesitate to say it out loud in public. But what we don't know is how and when those rumors started. It would have been intriguing to dive into all that instead of just skipping over it all. Considering the number of plots that were dropped from Fire and Blood, some extra episodes would have greatly benefited the series. For example, Rhaenyra's tour for suitors in the book was a lot more drawn out, so it introduced readers to many houses, clarifying the division of who supported Rhaenyra as heir and who didn't. Even the problems with the Triarchy were just brought up in the show every now and then, instead of being explored on a deeper level. If they'd gone by the book for that plotline, that would have made for a super interesting subplot. Even later in the show, after a long time jump, we learned that Corlys Velaryon was injured after fighting a Triarchy resurgence for 6 years. We know he won, but we didn't get to see how. With shows like Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, fans are always going to be hungry for more, and it makes complete sense to not be able to include everything from the source material, but when more episodes are possible as per the budget allocated for the show, it's mostly better and more gratifying to flesh out the story instead of skipping core moments. Or do you think more episodes would have spread out the budget and deprived us of some of the awesome moments we did get to see? Moving on, on, let's talk about what the creators of the show did incorporate from George R.R. Martin's wishes. House of the Dragon, the complete first season, which is available on 4K Ultra, HDTM, Blu-ray, and DVD, contains a bunch of special features, where the cast and crew talk about the dragons on the show. The interviews start with one by the series author George R.R. Martin himself, who goes on to describe what he wanted from the dragons on the show. Martin stated that in most shows with dragons, you see the mythical creatures having big fat bodies with little bitty wings. He talked about how the aerial dynamics of that kind of body just don't work, and that for them to be able to fly, they'd have to have large wings, a relatively slender, kind of serpentine body, a long tail, and a long neck as well. For Martin, he saw dragons as more like pterodactyl or dinosaurs, and this was something showrunners Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik agreed to follow through on. In their interview, they talked about how Martin really wanted the dragons in the show to be recognizable from afar as unique and individual creatures. And if there's one thing we can agree on, it's that came through in the show super well. For instance, one look at the dragons, and you can easily tell Rhaenyra Syrax apart from Daemon's Caraxes. The same is true for all the others. Here's how they came up with some of the inspiration for the dragon designs. According to Millie Alcock, who played young Rhaenyra, they based the personalities of the dragons off of animals. Syrax, for example, was based on an eagle, while Caraxes was depicted as more of a cantankerous loner, according to Matt Smith, who plays Daemon. We saw a lot more dragons in the aptly named House of the Dragon than we did in Game of Thrones, and we know we're going to be seeing more in the upcoming seasons. Their presence is kind of a given considering the name of the show and their inextricable link to the story being covered in the series. Unfortunately though, we're going to have to wait until 2024 to see more of them in action. Finally, let's talk a bit about what we can expect from the second season we have to wait over a year for. Season 2 stands to introduce some exciting new characters. First and foremost, you've got Cregan Stark, the first Lord of Winterfell, also known as the Wolf of the North. Beyond Cregan, we might also see Adam and Alan Velaryon, two men who earned that powerful last name over the duration of the war. Other than that, we can also expect to see Hugh Hammer and Nettles, both of whom have strong connections to the scene between Daemon and the dragon Vermithor in the last episode of Season 1. The key cast will obviously be returning and reprising their roles, and we're also expecting the season to focus on the story of Alicent and Rhaenyra. The younger versions of both characters aren't expected to return though, since that part of the story is done, but creator Ryan Condal hasn't entirely ruled out future appearances in the form of flashbacks. Another person who won't be returning is Miguel Sapochnik, the co-showrunner for Season 1. He stepped down from the job, stating that he felt like it was the right move for him personally and professionally. Filming for the next season is expected to begin in early 2023, but we don't have an exact premiere date for you just yet. HBO hasn't confirmed anything about release dates, but if they stay on track with filming, we might just get to see it by some point in 2024. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think the show creators should have added more episodes to the season? Or do you think it was great as it was? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. We'll see you in the next one.